Hello, friends. We're back at episode 193 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. This is the weekly podcast where we talk about the great highlights and additional resources that are shared every single week at ourweekly.org. My name is Eric Nance, and yeah, hard to believe January is almost over, and I'm not sure if y'all listening are kind of like this in the wintertime, but this is not my favorite season, so I'm kind of hoping to get back to the spring very soon. But nonetheless, I'm talking about happy stuff today, but I'm not doing it alone, of course. I'm joined by my awesome co-host, Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing this morning?
Doing pretty well, Eric. Yeah, it's quiet this time of year with the weather here in New England, and I think we'll talk about it later on in the episode, but I'm already excited for summer and conference season specifically.
Absolutely. Me too. Yeah, we will get to that in a little bit. Little admin note here as we're recording this. The issue as we're recording is not quite out yet. It's baking in the oven, so to speak. So we're going to talk about a couple of the highlights that we know for sure will make it, but we always invite you, check out the episode show notes for a direct link to the issue so that when this episode is published, you'll definitely see it then. But nonetheless, our curator this week is John Calder, another one of our longtime curators. And as always, he had tremendous help from our fellow Our Weekly team members and contributors like you around the world with your poll requests and other suggestions. I was just talking to Mike in the pre-show how I'm preparing for a big set of work meetings this week, and I've had to make slides and probably my not so favorite tool to do it. But luckily in this first highlight, we can talk about one of my favorite tools to make slides going forward for future thinking, you might say. And that, of course, is Reveal.js format, a web-based format, which is now becoming more of a mainstream capability thanks to the Quarto documentation system. So I have been using Quarto a bit more, especially for my open source presentations, and I always feel like I'm on the cusp of learning a lot, but there's always things I feel like I don't know, especially in the day-to-day of building, effective presentations, not just on the content, but some of the mechanics of Reveal.js themselves. So I am always eager to see new resources being shared by the community on more practical kind of day-to-day life, so to speak, of creating Reveal.js-based slides. And our first highlight is addressing that such item here. It has been brought to us by Dr. Tom Palmer, who is a senior lecturer in biostatistics at the University of Bristol over in the UK. And he's got this great blog post on 7 tips that he has learned for creating Quarto Reveal.js presentations. And as a teacher or lecturer himself, yeah, it's definitely, I can tell he has a lot of great experience with it. So we'll kind of tag team here on a few of the tips we're seeing here. One of which, and often I hear this when I prepare for an external presentation that may be at a conference venue, such as like PositConf or some of these other statistics conferences I've been to. It's one thing when you develop the slides on your setup, whether it's your laptop or you got a nice monitor that you're, looking at the fancy fonts and your images. But you probably want to test your slides on a display that does mimic where it's actually going to be presented, whether that's trying to optimize for like remote viewers and their, say, laptop resolutions, or like I said, an aforementioned like conference room venue that your presentation might be in. So it's one thing when you have a WYSIWYG type tool like Microsoft PowerPoint or LibreOffice Impress or whatnot, where you can kind of resize the window and everything just magically, becomes smaller as you're resizing it. Not always that way when you look at web-based slides. So taking a page from mobile development, one of the great tools you can utilize directly in your browser, this is independent of Quarto itself, is to look at changing the resolution in your browser, whether you do it for the console tools or developer tools that you see in all the modern web browsers. There are also extensions that will let you do this too, so you can see what your content looks like, say, on a mobile resolution or a more standard 1080p resolution. So it's just one of those nice things that as you're getting ready to do that presentation, it's always good to kind of do that double check. Did your fancy, graphics or your nice plot look good on those other, partitions or those other areas of display. So I'm going to take that to note, especially as I prepare for presentations, hopefully later in the year. Then we get to looking at putting code chunks in your presentations, which again is always what I like to do when I do a more educational, / training type presentation. You already have a lot of great tools available for you via the code chunk options in Quarto or R Markdown for that matter, because again, as we've mentioned many times on this very show, without R Markdown, Quarto, in my opinion, doesn't exist. It pioneered everything here. So there are some interesting options that you can use in these code chunks that, bring to the lineage of R Markdown that I did not know about. One of which is direct interaction with the format R package, and in particular using a couple options called tidy and tidy ops, which I had not seen these before. But this is great when you want to control how wide the code is that you're putting into that chunk, so you don't have to use, say, a scroll bar if you want to display a little more text and the user doesn't have to scroll right or left. So with these options, you can either set them on a per chunk basis, or you can set them globally in the YAML front matter of the Quarto slide deck via these aforementioned tidy and tidy ops options. And again, that is really, really neat, so that you can make sure that, a lot of people do have wider resolutions, but if you're on a constrained, resolution, you may not want your users to have to scroll right or left just to see the output of that variable or whatnot. So I thought that was extremely nice for that more horizontal optimal viewing experience. But there's a lot more to this. So Mike, why don't you walk us through the rest of Tom's great tips here?
Yeah, absolutely. There's not really an easy way to make code output chunks taller in a Quarto Reveal.js presentation. So we have to dive into the HTML and the CSS, and Dr. Palmer shows us how to navigate to the developer tools in Chrome to see that HTML source code. So if you've never done that before, this is a great blog post to introduce yourself to that concept. I know, if you're in the Shiny world at all, this is probably something that you wrestle with on a fairly regular basis to make your Shiny app look the way that you want it to. But whenever we are delivering something involving HTML, this is potentially something that we have to wrestle with in order to make it look the way that our audience wants it to look. So once we figure out the element specifically that we're trying to modify, we can create a custom CSS file that alters the max height CSS property for that element in order to make it taller. And then we can make sure that our presentation leverages our new custom CSS file by using the CSS YAML header property at the top of our Quarto file, our QMD file. So that was a nice little trick, as well as a couple more I'll touch on here. There's a lot. Embedding interactive Mentimeter presentations. So this is something I had not come across before.
So yeah, Mike, I have not heard of Mentimeter either, and I did a quick search, and it looks like this is a way to embed interactive polling into your presentation slides, not too dissimilar to what you might do with another framework I've seen called Slido or whatnot, where you can embed these HTML representations of what looks like these interactive polling into your other HTML documents. So this is news to me. Interesting.
Yeah, it sort of reminded me of our Shiny in Production workshop that we did at PositConf 2023, where I know you, Eric, embedded a bunch of Quarto presentations that we created, one for each module in our training, into the overall workshop website. So, I think it can be a pretty useful thing, right, in order to have these iframes that we can embed in other places. So it sounds like this Mentimeter tool is something to check out if that's of interest to you, and a nice walkthrough here about how to leverage and create those iframes and get the code that you need to copy and paste the HTML from one place into another in order to embed that. And then two more little ones. Sometimes, Dr. Palmer notes that, HTML tables may not look the way that you want them to look. And it's possible to sort of avoid Quarto's inherent HTML table processing. And there is a parameter, aptly named HTML-table-processing that you can set to none if you'd like to. And there's a nice example code chunk in there that Dr. Palmer provides of how to go about doing that. And there's a couple more nuggets in here, but it's a great walkthrough of 7 different tips that Dr. Palmer has on enhancing your Quarto presentations and little tips and tricks, because I think, at least in my experience, Eric, there's always something that you have to wrestle with in your Quarto presentations to make it look the way that you want to. And there's a lot of different rabbit holes that you could potentially go down. And I know the Quarto.org site is fantastic in terms of the documentation and the searchability, but I have been down many, many internet rabbit holes trying to chase down little tiny Quarto things that are just quality of life enhancements. And it's really nice to see Dr. Palmer's blog taking a stab at a few of these.
Yeah, I think this is a welcome time as I'm going to, I've been on you might say a crusade at the day job of trying to evangelize the use of web-based formats. This is something that Mike and I definitely sympathize with each other about, because we both have our own internal struggles. We either clients or other customers at our various day job duties, where it's still either a PowerPoint or a PDF world, right? It's just sometimes you can't escape it. So having like a consolidated bank of day-to-day tips, such as what Dr. Palmer has put together here, as well as, I'll plug once again, Emil's SlideCraft series of blog posts that he has on his blog. Those are all top-notch resources. Do you have to learn every option? No, absolutely not. I mean, as you said, in the Quarto docs, there is a multitude of options and tweaks you can make. But even in this post here, knowing that little trick around the HTML tables, this is all news to me, as well as some of those other code chunk options that I mentioned at the beginning of the segment. So when you need it, I hope that posts like this combined with the Quarto docs, you can have a great bank at your disposal that you can draw upon when you kind of need a certain technique more often than not. But going back to that whole idea of getting to web-based formats versus static outputs, it was both amusing and frankly a little sad that, there is another tip here about exporting the PDF, which comes up no matter what, right? There are some, especially when you go to some external conferences, who insist on having a static format of a presentation, even if you made it in a web-based format. So if you are in that world, that tip using the page down package to help print this via Chrome or Chrome browser's kind of printing utility, that might be your best bet. Just be warned, there are some gotchas when you export these to PDF, especially if you have content that is a little more interactive. Obviously, it's going to be a snapshot of that. But again, maybe that's fodder to, if you're on a similar crusade at your organization, to show the power of web-based formats. You can say, well, this is what you're missing when you export the PDF. So who knows? Maybe it'll be helpful in that sense. But yeah, this is definitely being bookmarked for a future reference here.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, trying to do all the convincing as possible to have our deliverables be HTML, because I think that is the ideal state for us as developers, but it's not always the case. You're right.
Maybe in the future, for those that are still, admittedly way more comfortable than me in those more WYSIWYG type, presentation software, where it's Keynote or PowerPoint or LibreOffice Impress or whatnot. Imagine a world where there's been kind of some progress with the whole interactive Quarto or Markdown editing features and, say, our Studio IDE or Positron, I should say. Imagine that with slides. Like, if we can get there eventually, where if you're able to, with some clever CSS tricks under the hood, still kind of move things around in a more design principle, but yet it all just magically compiles that correct CSS behind the scenes, somebody is going to make a huge, huge impact if they can make that happen. But for now, I'll still whip up the code for it.
So our last highlight here is from our OpenSci. It's a community call, I think. And the title of the call is From Novice to Contributor, Making and Supporting First-Time Contributions to Fully Open Source Software, or FOSS for short. I think the community call was moderated by Shanina Bishini Saibane, who is very prominent in the R OpenSci community. And there are, I think, 4 other folks who participated on this call speaking about their journey to their first contributions in open source.
Yes, indeed, Mike. And I'll give my take on a couple of those presenters and their findings, because as someone who is admittedly, I want to contribute even more to open source, but also been in the trenches of whether it's open source contributions or day job contributions with concepts like version control. There are a lot of interesting nuggets that resonated with me. I'm going to first talk about Sunny Singh's presentation, where she gave a walkthrough for her experience in creating a new R package, basically from the ground up, called BBS Taiwan. And the BBS stands for Breeding Birds Survey. And this package, she wanted to fill an unmet need of an easy way for our users to download and import these data into their R session, and to be able to perform summaries and visualizations on the fly with very helpful functions that would be, fit right at home for a lot of the tidyverse type of workflows. So she talks about, some great kind of tips that she learned. And honestly, the ones that resonated most with me about her motivation to do it, and then to be able to connect with future users in a really neat setting, where she actually helped with another colleague organize a workshop to undergraduate students over in Taiwan to learn this package kind of, from the very beginnings in the early stages of it release. And she says she got wonderful feedback from it, and that it really motivated her to see the positive reception to this package. And she, of course, many package authors help the cause a little bit more. She even came with stickers, buddy. Like she came running to make sure that she could get the word out of this package. But nonetheless, a lot of positive reception, and it was a lot of learning for her on the technical sense as well. Another nugget that she shares is that creating a package is a very fluid process. You may come in with one set of ideas for the way you want to construct your functions for the package, but as you're actually developing it and you start to try to put on that hat or that persona of a would-be user, you realize, maybe there's a better way to expose that functionality, or maybe I can consolidate these into more utility type functions. So she went through that in this initial release of the BBS Taiwan package.
One thing that I love about Sunny's presentation, besides the fact that I think it's an awesome initiative, I really like the slides that she put together, but the BBS Taiwan package is a great hex logo featuring her own art, a bird that I believe that she drew and was able to incorporate into this hex logo. So shout out Sunny for that.
Absolutely. A great sticker goes a long way sometimes, but yeah, a lot of that talk resonated with me. And then the other one I want to summarize here comes from Pascal Boucard, who was a longtime user of Git, but yet still in his early journey with contributing to open source software. And so he talks about a way that he got into this more fully by finding an issue with another package that's authored by our OpenSci, in particular, one of our longtime contributors and fellow curator in the past, Maal Salmon. Pascal was leveraging the Babel Quarto package because he wanted to develop his teaching materials for his day job in multiple languages. Another great win for accessibility there. And he noticed a small issue with Babel Quarto, and so he opened up an issue on the repository, the GitHub repository. Maal got back to him saying, hey, I recognize this. I won't have time to address it now, but a pull request is welcome. And that was a great, kickstart for Pascal to not just, identify an issue, but to actually help fix it as well. And so he learned a lot in that process. And that's that small collaboration on solving this issue in Babel Quartal. He learned so much in those 2 months of that collaboration, much more than he would have learned just trying to learn about the ideas of collaboration on his own. A key nugget for me is finding that motivation and finding that really important use case to you that will let you push through some inevitable hurdles you might have as you think about contributing to open source. So that was a great insight by Pascal as well. And then he talks about some of the Git specific tips that I think are very much in my wheelhouse as well. And I definitely try to keep myself accountable to following these. One of which is the use of branches. Branches are your friend. They're nothing to be scared of. You could have as many of these as you want. The best part about this is that if you mess something up or if you had an idea and it ends up being a complete dead end, you can just throw that branch away. It's as if it never happened. Go back to your main branch, or however you like to call your upstream, type of branch, and then you can start fresh. You don't have to worry about renaming files of like _attempt1 or _ I hope this works. It all is all consolidated in Git branches. So if you learn nothing else from my summary of this, please use Git branches. Future you will thank you later. The other parts that
Amen. Amen.
Amen. Exactly. This is the part, Mike, where you want to make sure to keep me honest throughout this year, because I really want to be better about this. It really is helpful to commit early and to commit often. It's very easy for me, at least, to be in the flow of like really trying to solve that esoteric issue. I finally got it working, but I find myself, I have edited about 5 or 6 files to solve that issue. Then I have to try to almost go back in time and be like, well, had I followed this advice earlier, what would I have committed first? Save yourself some pain. And as you get close to that fix, don't be afraid to commit often, because there are ways you can kind of consolidate this after the fact. But if you just get it done, you can massage it a bit later. And also be nice to future you. Don't just say, I fixed it in your commit message. Have a little more verbiage of like what you actually fixed, because you can use this as like a diary of sorts, your development diary of your project. And you can figure out from like 3 months ago, how did I fix that esoteric issue with this shiny reactive not firing when I wanted it to? What did I have to do with that observe trick? This is literally fresh in my mind from yesterday. And then I put in that commit. I'm like, okay, that's a kind of a way to reinforce that a bit. So he also talks about ways you can undo things in Git. There are commands to do it, as well as, like I mentioned, maybe consolidating those messages in a more succinct manner via a technique that I know I don't do enough of, and that's called rebasing. It sounds kind of frightening when you hear it, but if you just practice it a bit, I think rebasing can be very helpful as you think about how you want this to look a month from now, a year from now, as you look back at this development history. So there were some real good nuggets from Pascal in his talk there.
Yeah, Eric, those are all really good points. And I think it's really specifically important to practice these, good Git concepts of committing early, committing often, being really intentional about your commits, that are especially important when you're working with other people, right? Especially as we talk about the concept of contributing to open source and projects other folks are on. But it has to start with when no one else is looking, when you're doing it yourself, to build those muscles such that when you do get into collaborative situations, it's second nature for you, and you're not having to sort of change your workflow. I have in the past been just as guilty of, getting in that flow state and changing too many things before I go to actually make that commit. And tools like GitHub Desktop, and I'm sure there are many other, tools out there that can help you sort of visually maintain your Git environment. have been game changing for me, because if I do change a file in multiple places, I can actually within GitHub Desktop select specific lines of that file, that specific changes that I want to commit, and not necessarily the whole entire file. So I can break it down and make it look in my Git commit history like I committed early and often, and was very intentional, and very specific about what I changed and why. So that's been a game changer for me in terms of helping me have really good Git hygiene. So a little tip for anyone out there. And I know, Eric, you might use some other GUI-based Git tools that perhaps do the same thing. So I would be interested to hear your experience there as well.
Yep. One that's on each of my machines here at home is called Git Kraken, and it's a cross-platform GUI editor. It's not open source, so if that's a thing that concerns you, be warned. But nonetheless, it does exactly as you said in your GitHub Desktop workflow. I was literally using that feature the other day with some of my other open source work of, well, I don't want to commit the whole file for this commit because there's only a certain section that's relevant to this message. So I simply staged those chunks, if you will, did the commit, and then did the other part of the file in the remaining commit. And little tip for those of you that are operating on the terminal side of things, whether it's by choice or not by choice, and you don't have access to GitHub Desktop or Git Kraken on that remote environment, I'm going to plug a project called Lazy Git. There's nothing lazy about this, folks. This is a terminal-based Git client that will look as if you tried to put what you would see in GitHub Desktop or Git Kraken in a terminal-like workflow. So I can have a pane on the left that says, here are all my unstaged, files. And then I can have on the right for each file, what are those actual chunks? And I can do exactly as I just said. I can select via keyboard, that particular line, that particular chunk. I can do a little, hit the C button, write the commit, hit enter, it's in. And shortcuts for pushing and pulling, new branches. It took a little getting used to, but as like I said, maybe not necessarily by choice all the time that I'm on a terminal interacting with Git operations, but if you're in that space, Lazy Git is worth a look. And there's, like I said, nothing lazy about it.
Sounds awesome, and that's what I'm going to have to check out. That's a great shout out.
Yep, that's in a running tmux session on our HPC environment for each project that has its own Lazy Git window and one window for each of them. So sometimes I made this mistake of doing the wrong repo for a message. Wait, why isn't that file there? Oh, yep, silly me. I have too many projects open at once. Yeah, first world problems, I guess. But there is a lot more to this talk. You're invited to check out the recording. There was another presenter that talked a lot about their experiences with incorporating automated testing in their contribution. So I think that's a great one to learn about as well. And then also, if you're listening to this and you watch this recording, you're still wanting to maybe learn a bit more, but in a more proactive fashion, we're going to have linked in the show notes a call for a co-working hackathon that iamYannC is going to lead, one of which is happening on February 4th and another one on March 4th, where they'll let you kind of partner with somebody on that call. And as the title suggests, you both could be working on either the same project or even different projects and just share notes with each other as you're working on that. So it's a great way to learn with an expert on that call as you're doing your day-to-day development. And maybe you are trying to get into contributing to open source software, learning Git effectively. Those co-working sessions have gotten rave reviews from the people I've talked to with attending them. So credit to iamYannC for putting that effort together to make those happen.
Yeah, it's awesome that they offer, those office hour sessions, especially for folks, like myself, especially when I was first starting out. And I think in the age of remote work nowadays, it can sometimes feel a little lonely. So if you're looking to hop on and be surrounded by other folks out there who are writing R the same as you on just a collaborative call, I think it's an awesome, awesome initiative.
Absolutely. And speaking of awesome, the rest of the issue is just as awesome. We were able to cover what we think are guaranteed highlights for the issue, but we'll take a couple minutes for our additional finds here. And this is more of a reminder of sorts, but very in my wheelhouse, as they say, with my love for Shiny. As Mike and I alluded to, it's already a lot of preparations are underway for conference season here in 2025. And one of those that I'm always a big fan of for, I believe it'll be the third or fourth year running, Epsilon's Shiny Conf is happening this April. And they still have registration open as well as the call for talk proposals. So I believe the deadline to submit for the talk proposal is February 2nd. So you'll want to get those in if you want to contribute your excellent idea or excellent project idea about Shiny or use of Shiny. Epsilon's always been very receptive to a lot of these ideas. Full disclosure, I am on the program committee, so I'm really looking forward to being a part of that review process. And I remember narrowing it down from last year, there was a lot of great content out there and a lot of great ideas. So definitely have that in your bank if you're a Shiny enthusiast. And more generally, while I'm on this topic of conferences, I believe also the talk submission portal for PositConf 2025 is still open, but that will be closing, I believe, around February 2nd or 3rd as well. So if you have an idea for a talk for PositConf, you want to get those proposals in there as well. And we'll have a link to both of those conferences in the show notes. And Mike, what did you find?
Nothing, because the issue is not out yet. But I am just going to double down on both of those things because I think it can't be said enough. The ShinyConf, fantastic conference. Is it free?
Yeah, it's virtually, and I believe it's free. Yep.
I believe so too. No excuse not to be there. It's excellent conference. I know, Eric, you'll be involved heavily as always. So that's one I look forward to attending every year, and grateful for Epsilon for putting that on.
Absolutely. And a quick little nugget to my fellow compatriots in life sciences. We are also in the plannings of the R Pharma conference already. We start early because we do a lot for that. So if you're listening, you want to get involved with that, definitely give me a shout and I can get you lined up for our various committees on that as well. But yeah, speaking of contributing, we talk about first-time contributors to open source. Well, a great way to ease your way into contributing to open source in general is with this very project itself of R Weekly, right? We curate from the community. So if you find a great resource and you want this to be front and center in next week's issue, we are just a pull request away. Everything's on GitHub. Everything's in Markdown. You don't need a fancy WYSIWYG editor for this one, folks. You can just type in plain text to your heart's content on these pull request templates that we'll provide to you free of charge, of course. So head to rweekly.org to find all the great links and details, for contributing that great resource that you found, whether you authored it or you found it from someone else in the community. And also, we love hearing from you online, whether you're keeping me honest with my pronunciation skills or other great tidbits. We have a contact page in the episode show notes. You can send a note to Mike and I directly on that. And also, you can get in touch with us on social media. I am primarily now on both Mastodon, where I am at our podcast at podcastindex.social, as well as Blue Sky, where I am at our podcast .bluesky.social or something like that. Anyway, it's in the show notes. It's still not muscle memory for me to recite it yet. Mike, where can they find you?
Yeah, probably mostly on Blue Sky these days. If you're looking for, social media, mike-thomas.bsky.social, or on LinkedIn, if you search Ketchbrook Analytics, KETCHBROOK, you can see what I'm up to.
Very good, very good. I'm knee-deep in some interesting issues I hope to post more about, but my journey with Nix continues, and I'm leveling up even more on that, so I hope to share more in the coming months. That and container fun, it never stops there. All right, nonetheless, we are going to close up shop for episode 193 of our Weekly Highlights. We thank you so much for listening, and we hope to have you listening to next week's episode of our Weekly Highlights. We